As China undergoes profound changes, competition for jobs becomes a struggle to survive. Two graduates fresh out of college seek employment in a city of 8 million people. Now entering the real world, the graduates become increasingly desperate and begin to question their college-trained talents. It's a time of hope and frustration for the workforce of the future. Faces of China at this time on Al Jazeera.
Welcome back to Al Jazeera. Reminder of our top stories. At least 15 people have been killed and 22 wounded in a suicide attack in northwest Pakistan. The explosion took place inside a military base in the Murdan region. The attacker was wearing a school uniform. Mass protests are continuing in Egypt for a 17th day. Thousands of workers are expected to strike for a second day as they demand pay rises and government reforms. Muslim separatists in the Philippines have resumed peace talks with the government. However, there are concerns over a split in the ranks of the MILF. Now, she's best known as a Republican in the United States, but is Sarah Palin in the best position to run for president in 2012? Rosalind Jordan with the latest on the former vice presidential candidate.
The governor of Alaska and the next vice president of the United States, Sarah Palin.
From the moment she stepped on the American political stage in 2008, Sarah Palin has been as much celebrity as politician. Books, reality shows, lucrative speech making, and a starring role in the conservative Tea Party movement. But as the 2012 presidential campaign heats up, conservative activists question whether Palin is the candidate they should support.
And that's how it is with us.
She turned down the keynote slot at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference considered a must-do for any serious Republican with Oval Office dreams. Palin's reason? Schedule conflicts.
I've never attended a CPAC conference ever, so I was kind of taken aback this go around when I couldn't make it to this one either. And then there was a speculation, well, I either agree or disagree with some of the groups or issues that CPAC is discussing. It really is a matter of time for me.
Had Palin attended, she would have faced questions from activists and reporters alike, something she's largely avoided by doing just no media events. One of the big questions, if Palin is so popular, why are her poll numbers so weak? Those recently polled in Democratic powerhouse California naturally chose Obama over Palin by a 2-to-1 margin. However, Obama nearly beat Palin in Republican-leaning Nebraska and beat her outright in Tennessee. Even against other Republicans, Palin isn't doing well. In 3 recent polls, one national, another in the state of Georgia, and the last in South Carolina, voters chose other candidates over Palin. Part of the problem, according to one conservative analyst, Palin has spent more time on herself in the past 2 years and not enough on her political credentials.
I thought she had a real chance to take the lead on a few policy issues, to do a little more in terms of framing the policy agenda. I don't think she's particularly done that, but she's a shrewd woman. I certainly wouldn't underestimate her.
Indeed, Palin's message is that she's not worried.
I'm looking at the lay of the land now.
Perhaps because she knows that as long as she can command public attention, she's still considered a player in U.S. politics. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, Susan Ruskey is a lecturer at the Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism in California and a former congressional correspondent for the New York Times. She joins me now from San Francisco. Thanks very much for your time, Susan. Is this gathering of Republican members or voters as such a good indicator of how they might decide who potentially could be a presidential candidate?
I think it's a chance for those whose names are far less familiar than Sarah Palin's to get themselves seen, written about, see how they play with the crowds. And I think in her case, it's sort of a bit of strategy to have decided to stay away.
What do you make of the fact that people like Sarah Palin are not attending, and yet we have possibly people like Mitt Romney from Massachusetts, the House Speaker Newt Gingrich speaking?
Far more important for Mitt Romney to be seen in any kind of favorable way by conservatives, right? I mean, Sarah Palin will have some favorable response from a base of conservative voters in the country, whether she attends or not. For Mitt Romney, it's an opportunity to say, hello, I'm not exactly a part of you, but we share a lot of common values. Much more an important appearance for him than it is for Sarah Palin.
Paul West, he writes for the LA Times, and he talks about social conservatives, and they dominate the event and the eventual nomination. Could you explain for our international audience why ultra-conservatives don't do so well at an event like this?
Well, part of this tension between social conservatives, those who are conservatives on matter of religion, abortion, family, what we have referred to here as family values, are very different from economic conservatives. And it's the activists who dominate the primary season. We've got a long road up to the presidential election in 2012. Before we get to it, we have a series of primaries in almost every state in the union. And it's that series of primary elections that a candidate has to win. And sometimes what you have to do to win the primary, get to the very right of the field to get support from the activists, is very different from what you have to do by the time you get to the general election, when you're much more interested in appealing to the middle of the country, because that's the only way you can win. So it's often interesting to watch the tightrope this early in the campaign as the candidates try to position themselves so they don't get caught later on.
Depending on where you are in the United States, would you describe that, or would you say that there's a sort of election fatigue? We only just recently had elections in the United States in November, and now we're talking about a presidential election 18 months in the future.
Absolutely, and I think you have to rest assured that the only people talking about presidential elections at this point are the political consultants, the political wannabes, and perhaps the folks inside the Beltway. No ordinary American at this stage of the game is even remotely interested in the 2012 elections.
Well, we certainly are on Al Jazeera, and thank you very much, Susan, for your insight. Look forward to welcoming you back on the programme. Thanks a lot. Well, Republicans in the US are making clear how serious they are about cutting back on government spending. They've released a list of more than 60 programmes they want to see slashed. Now, it comes as President Obama prepares to send the 2012 budget to Congress next week. John Terrett reports.
In Washington, all the talk is about the 2012 budget and the battle now ramping up over cuts versus spending to boost economic growth. The Republican Party, which runs the House of Representatives, is laying out plans for deep cuts in social programs, from health and education to transport and law enforcement, affecting millions of Americans.
Clearly, our number one issue is getting the economy going again and getting people back to work. And we believe that in order for that to happen, that we need to cut spending. We need to stop unnecessary regulation that's hampering small businesses' ability to hire people.
President Obama must wrestle between cutbacks to appease the Republicans and efforts to boost the underperforming U.S. economy, which will entail some spending. On his budget radar, plans to help cash-strapped U.S. states that have borrowed billions from the federal government to cover soaring unemployment benefits by freezing their interest rate payments for 2 years. Republicans see this as a massive government spend. The president insists it's necessary to stimulate growth. On Wednesday, the head of the U.S. Central Bank, Ben Bernanke, told the now Republican-controlled House Budget Committee there may be signs of optimism, but a lack of jobs growth is still a big problem.
Until we see a sustained period of stronger job creation, we cannot consider the recovery to be truly established.
That lack of jobs growth is hurting the president's approval ratings. A new poll shows President Obama gets low marks from Americans for the way he's dealing with the economy. The Gallup survey shows only 37% approve, while a whopping 60% disapprove. Global economic woes have their roots in the US housing market, and bailing out two giants of the industry, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, cost taxpayers billions of dollars. As the 2012 budget details begin to leak, it's clear the Obama administration is set on cutting them loose so that never again will the government have to step in as it did in the aftermath of the collapse in 2008-2009. The president may send his budget to the Congress next week, but as usual in the US system, arguing over its finer points may take more than a year to play out. John Terrett, Al Jazeera, Washington.
The Brazilian government has announced budget cuts of about $30 billion. The measure is aimed at controlling inflation, which is at a 6-year high. The country's finance minister says infrastructure and social programs won't be affected. Full details will be released next week. Over in Colombia, the first of 5 hostages set to be released by FARC rebels has gained his freedom. 35-year-old councilman Marcos Boquero was flown to safety on a borrowed Brazilian helicopter. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos says he will not start peace talks with the FARC until all the hostages are freed. The US State Department said on Wednesday that it would quote an unfortunate distraction if former Haitian President Jean-Bertrand Aristide returned to the country before next month's presidential runoff. On Tuesday, Aristide's lawyer collected a passport for the former leader, who's currently living in exile in South Africa. And another former Haitian leader missed a court appearance on Wednesday, instead paying a visit to his doctor. Jean-Claude Duvalier's lawyer said the former president was complaining of neck pain. Duvalier, also known as Baby Doc, was due to answer accusations of corruption, embezzlement and misappropriation of funds during his regime. On Wednesday, the Mexican army celebrated what they say was the rescue of dozens of migrants held hostage by drug traffickers. But it turns out all was not what it seemed. A PR stunt or an honest mistake. From Mexico City, Frank Contreras investigates.
A potential political embarrassment for Mexico. On Tuesday, Mexico's army triumphantly announced it had released 47 immigrant men, the majority Guatemalan. In a news release, the army said the men were being held against their will in a safe house allegedly belonging to drug traffickers. But hours later, in an unusual move, a spokeswoman for the Guatemalan Foreign Ministry told reporters that the migrants apparently were not kidnapped. And later, in a news release, the Guatemalan